Chapter 14. The next morning dawned misty and damp. When Charlie was out practicing with the acrobats, each of the electric light bulbs that adorned the ship's rigging, some remained for them to use though the masts were down, was itself adorned with drips of misty drops of water, through which light shone and refracted, each reflecting off the others and glowing in the mist. Charlie had not seen the lights illuminated before. The entire ship gleamed like a ghost. The raindrops flew, shattering rainbows as the acrobats jumped and swung. Charlie felt like a ghost, a flying, silent ghost. "What do you think, lion boy?" It was Major Tibb, looming out of the mist in his green velvet jacket, tall and suave as Captain Hook. "It's gorgeous, sir," said Charlie, coming down from a handstand on the edge of a funnel and wishing he was somewhere else. He didn't want to look the Major in the face when he was about to trick him out of his lions. "Looking forward to the parade tonight?" "Oh, yes, sir," said Charlie. "And the show tomorrow?" "Oh, yes, sir," said Charlie. "I know what you've got to do." "Yes, sir, and looking forward to it," said Charlie bravely. Mighty glad, said Major Tibb, but his attention had wandered and Charlie could escape. He did know what he had to do, more than Major Tibb could dream of. Not only did he know how to lower and raise the ring cage and pin it in place and let the lions in and out of the ring, he also knew how he was going to get the lions away from their life of captivity and tricks, off the boat and, if necessary, onto the train to Venice and freedom, en route for Africa. The night before he had sat up late with the lions, hatching their plan. Tonight he would be in the parade, and tomorrow would be his first and last day with the show, the day he would steal the lions. "I wonder where we are," murmured Aniba. He wished he had his phone with its global tracking device, which would have told them immediately. Well, before Winner had taken the phone off him again and they had been heading southeast. And they had been travelling quite slowly, he felt, for days. France, he thought, and the river. The sea would be a rougher ride and deeper. The door flung open. There was Winner, with a hat pulled down over his head. "Put these on," he snapped, throwing a pair of what looked like giant socks at them. "Even my feet aren't that big," said Aniba. He liked annoying Winner with jokes. "Shut up," said Winner. "On your heads." Magdalene and Aniba put the socks over their heads, Magdalene giving Aniba a last beseeching look, "Please can we wallop them and run" look, and allowed themselves to be handcuffed and pushed out the door. Darkness and stumbling. The giant socks smelt mouldy and damp, but through them came an unmistakable smell of outdoors. It was cold, but they both breathed deeply, glad of the fresh air at last. Winner tripped over something. They could hear him cursing. Something brushed Magdalene's legs. A noise. "Meow!" And Winner complaining and standing up. There was something under Magdalene's hand, warm and furry. She knew exactly what to do. The cat was moving into position beneath her bound hand. No, wrong end, tail, rather a bald tail by the feel. Head. She stroked it swiftly, wanting to convey kindness and gratitude. Neck, collar, yes, a piece of paper, yes. She hissed, "Thank you," under her breath and got a meow in response before the cat disappeared. She held tightly to the scrap of paper, as tightly as if it had been her son himself, rather than a letter from him. 2 hours later, in the back of a truck parked up by one of the few remaining European motorways, Magdalene and Aniba read the letter from Charlie. Magdalene managed to unfold it, and Aniba wriggled into a position where he could read it aloud. A lone streetlight sent its weak gleam in through the grubby window of the truck. "It's upside down," Aniba said very quietly. He didn't want Winner overhearing. "Turn it left a bit so it's in the light." "Darling Mummy and Daddy, it was really good to get your letter. Everything's going okay for me. Brother Jerome is taking me to visit Rita's sister, and I know you are expected there too. If you get there first, try not to leave too soon, as I hope I can see you there. I am doing a project on pet cats. I wish I could ask you about it. Please tell me you can, all you can when you reply. I am being a very good little boy, like you said. Hope to see you very soon. I will bring some friends, bigger kids, to Rita's sisters. Lots of love from Charles. Rita's sister, said a neighbour. What's he on about? Rita's sister is called Paris, said Magdalene, smiling broadly in the dimness. Clever little blighter. So that's where we're headed. How does he know? Cats, said Magdalene. It's got to be. And the project on pet cats. Yes, said a neighbour. Magdalene folded up the letter again and held it firmly in her fist. He's finding out about the whole thing, presumably, she murmured. I suppose the cats are telling him. The allergenies and everything, I suppose, said a neighbour quietly. We were right not to tell him though, weren't we? Of course. What do you think they'd do with him if they thought he knew about it? If they knew what he could do? I hate to think, she said very quietly. Sorry, said a neighbour. Yeah, she said. They sat in silence for a moment. You know, she said, I wrote out the formula, the basic formula, and told him that if he had to go anywhere, he should take it with him. You what? Shouted a neighbour, so loud that Winner wondered for a moment what it was in the back. You what? He said more quietly and intently. I don't know why. I suppose so that if anything happened to us, at least one honest person would have that knowledge. One honest child, hissed a neighbour. One honest, ignorant kid who, if they knew he had it, would be totally at the mercy of these people, and if they knew what he can do as well. Yes, she sat miserably. Should I not have? No, you shouldn't have, he whispered furiously. Now, not only is he the only cat speaker, he's also got the formula. He did take it with him when he set off into the world all alone, totally unprepared. Of course, we don't know, but, oh God. Magdalene was crying softly. A neighbour didn't hear because he was too angry. Keep your voice down, she murmured. Don't tell everybody. It's bad enough. He's out there on his own with the formula and the language, and he doesn't have a clue about the allergenies or how they came about or anything. No, said Magdalene, but we don't know how they came about either. And he's learning, remember? His project on pet cats. He's a clever kid, a neighbour, and he's finding out what he needs to know and telling us he's doing it. We must get a letter back to him telling him as much as we can. But how's that cat going to find us again? And where are we? Heading to Paris, murmured a neighbour, if Charlie's right. But they weren't. They had passed Paris, and as soon as Winner had had his breakfast, they would be moving on again. Not with Winner and Sid, though. 3 large men from the personnel department arrived, punched Sid and Winner just because they could, and then bound and gagged a neighbour and Magdalene, who were being handcuffed and couldn't fight back. Magdalene had hidden the note in her boot, so that was all right. Not much else was, though. You have an appointment with the chief executive, was all they would say, and they said it with a sneer. He'll tell you all you need to know about the position. Raffi was getting frustrated. He'd had no luck with the zoos, no luck with the waterways, no luck in the city. He decided to go back to the fish stalls to bully Mr. Ubsworth. He felt like hitting someone, and in the absence of Charlie, Mr. Ubsworth would do. By noon, the great crimson ship was swanning slowly along the Canal St. Martin in the warm sunshine. It would have been a graceful sight, but for the noise it was making. The Calliope was in full voice. What a racket! It had been loud enough the time before on the river in London, but here, with the buildings all around, it blared and farted out like a troop of funfairs on a summer's day. A noise full of fun and nostalgia at the same time, an irresistible noise. Charlie noticed that a lot of the circus guys were down on the banks of the canal, doling out handbills with the details of the circus on them. The people were looking at the ship, laughing at the Calliope and reading the leaflets and putting them in their bags and their pockets. They all wanted to come to the circus. Then there were 4 more locks to negotiate on the Canal St. Martin. Charlie was always amazed by how snugly the ships fit into a lock, like a fat man in a bath. It's a wonder there's any room for the water, but there is, just enough to allow that curious, staggering, slightly sick-making motion as the boat tries to keep still and not bang against the edges. The locks sprayed their smelly foam, and the water tumbled and flooded in and out. The metal bar ladders set in the lock walls gleamed beneath their green weed, and the lock keepers called "Bonjour!" The traffic parked, and the lock bells rang. Pale green footbridges arched over the water, so high that the people who stopped at the top to admire the circus ship seemed to be standing on the branches of trees in among their sweet green leaves. Charlie was just getting used to it all, knowing that they were nearly at their destination, when the Calliope, which had been cranking away, suddenly wheezed and hiccuped to silence. The ship drew in to the temple lock. The smell of her fumes wafted back over them as she pulled to a halt and idled. It was here that a cat called out to Charlie from the bank. "You're to be told they've gone on," she called. "What?" called Charlie. "Come here, come on board." The cat shrugged. With a great rush and a tumble, the water began to flood out of the lock chamber, and the Circe began to sink down beneath it. Charlie rushed to the side nearest the cat and cried back, "Gone on? When? Where to? Is it Venice?" "Boff," said the cat. "I suppose. Only you're to be told they've gone on. I don't know any more." Ahead, the ship was facing a brick wall. At the top of it, he could see the back of a statue's head with a pigeon sitting on it and formally clipped dark green hedge. At the base, he noticed way down beneath him when he peered over a low stone arch. "Come here," he called the cat urgently. "Please come and tell me more. When did they leave?" If only he knew how they were travelling, how long they were taking. Perhaps he could work out if he could catch them up. "Please," he called, hissing, so he wouldn't be noticed. "I don't know nothing more," said the cat as the ship sank down into the lock. The cat sauntered off. Cursing at the cat, Charlie spun on his heel. Julius was giving him a most peculiar look. "Why are you yelling and spitting at that cat?" he asked. "For luck," said Charlie quickly. Then, "Oh my, look, what's going on?" He found himself looking down at the tiny arch up ahead of them. They were heading straight for it. "We can't go in there," he cried. "It's tiny." It wasn't so much tiny as far away and far down. It looked like a manhole. Charlie had a moment of panic. It was too steep. How could they go down so far, such a short distance? They seemed to be tumbling and sinking into the bowels of the earth. Even when the lock chamber was empty and the gates at the other end were opened, the ship was still way too big and the arch still way too low. It would be like crawling into a small cave, a dark little entrance to the underworld. But as they edged out of the locked chamber, he realised they were just entering another. This was a double lock, a steep set of watery stairs, and they were now looking even deeper into the dark, wet hole. They were sliding down a hole in the ground. Charlie couldn't help but thinking about the story of Orpheus, who went down into the underworld to get his wife, Eurydice, back from the land of the dead. And his parents weren't here after all. They'd already left. The damp, wet, dangerous hole matched his mood precisely. Suddenly, all the sunlight was gone. In the place of the lovely spring day he'd just been enjoying, with its blue sky and fluffy clouds, the red geraniums on the wrought iron balconies, the white shutters and black lampposts of Paris, they were surrounded now by slimy green walls and foaming yellow water. Looking back, Charlie could see the beautiful day disappearing behind them. A few wet green ferns framed it as it slid away through the dark curved arch astern. They were going into a huge, dark, damp tunnel. At the beginning, Charlie could see by the strong, beautiful stonework that it was really old, but then he could hardly see anything. There was a path along the right-hand edge, cobwebs black and dusty hanging from the roof, and a strange-looking, skinny stalactites, black with white tips. He could feel the chill of the wetness and the smell of the mildew water, and the smell of it chilled his bones, but he couldn't see much. He felt he was plunging in the wrong direction. A further journey, new problems. He had thought he had taken on the idea of Venice, but now he just felt as if he had no idea how to get there, what to do when he got there. In front of the Circe, the water was smooth and black. Behind, it was dirty and foamy with their wake. "Tunnel," whispered Julius beside him. His voice echoed spookily, up to the roof, down to the water. "Napoleon built the canals, and then—" But Charlie wasn't listening to him. He was shivering. He didn't like it at all. Then, up ahead, he saw an oval shaft of greeny golden light drop from the roof onto the surface of the water. And indeed, through the surface, it lit up the smooth green water and transformed it into a sort of milky column. For a moment, it made Charlie think about how deep the water was and what it would be like on the bottom of the underground canal. If the light had been at all comforting, this thought took all comfort away. "What's that?" he hissed to Julius. He didn't feel like hearing the echo again. "Skylight to the road above," he said. "There's traffic and everything going on up there. The canal used to be open to the air, like the first bit, but they covered it over." The skylight drifted away above them. As they passed under it, Charlie craned his neck to look up. High above, he could see the sky through a metal grille, a framing of leaves. The skylight must be positioned in a flower bed or a park. "Is it very long?" Charlie asked warily. He wanted to be outside again. "Nope," said Julius, "nearly there." The tunnel seemed to be curving. Charlie felt as if his stomach was being left behind, and maybe other parts of him too. He could see now that in fact the Circe herself was shining a light up ahead to see her way. Another weird, faded-looking skylight appeared in the roof, unloosening its spooky, glowing shaft before dropping away astern. The darkness closed around him again and stayed. "Nearly there," Charlie thought. "If only. And anyway, when I get there, then what?" Then another shaft of light and another. Looking back and forward, Charlie could see a pattern of arches and shafts of light, darkness and reflection where the columns of light fell from the outside world into the dim, smooth green water. It was beautiful, like molten glass ahead and a rushing river behind. There were immense iron rings set in the stonework of the curved over walls. If he reached up, he could have touched the crumbly stone ceiling. "How nearly there?" asked Charlie softly. Suddenly, a completely different kind of light, a bright electric and colourful, appeared in the dank wall beside them. A panel, modern and shiny, flashing the words "Bienvenue à Canal de Paris" in red. "Welcome to the canals of Paris." "Yeah, well," thought Charlie, not feeling at all welcome. Above his head, pigeons were cooing and pooing and nesting on iron girders. Then there were brassy, glassy tunnel crossings their path overhead, with a train rushing through it, Bastille metro station. And then they were spat out into the sunlight again, real, full, glorious, shining, warm, beautiful sunlight. Charlie was happy to be in it and out of the tunnel, but his low mood clung to him. They were there, Porte de Palais de Paris Arsenal, once the moat of the Bastille prison, where the aristocrats went in the French Revolution to await having their heads chopped off, where the prisoners trained rats to carry messages for them, and where people were imprisoned and forgotten about for years and years and years. The great high wall on the right was the remains of that great fortress. It was pretty different now, crowded with pleasure boats and market boats and cruisers and masses of people, and a park with playgrounds. But Charlie felt more like a prisoner, scared and desperate prisoner who was sworn to escape, but actually doesn't know if he dares. The crowd seemed to be expecting them. Residents came rushing out from their boats, popping their heads up out of the cockpits like gophers from their holes. The Lucidi family swung down to the quay even before the ship had docked, scattering handbills, and the Calliope started up again, wheezing and grunting like a sentimental old man singing the dance tunes of his youth. Everybody else was on deck, waving and making a big noise to show that the circus was in town. Major Tibbs' voice came back to Charlie. "We are not a circus, boy. We are the circus, the finest and the best, the most daring and the most astounding, the most magnificent show on earth. We are Tiberday's Royal Floating Circus and Equestrian Philharmonic Academy." Later, everyone would eat and rest, and they'd prepare themselves and their animals for the parade to take place that evening. All the work of the past few days, the mending and cleaning and practicing, was about to come to fruition. The Circe swung round to dock, looking back to the entrance of the canal tunnel. Charlie could see way above and beyond the metro platform in its glass tunnel, and beyond the stone wall and the treetops, a golden-winged figure that seemed to have landed with one elegant leg on top of a great tall column. With arms outstretched and wings flaring, it looked as if it might take off again at any moment. "What's that?" he asked Julius. "It's a monument to the French revolutions," said Julius. "That square is the Place de Bastille, where the prison was, and that statue is in the middle." "But what's the statue of?" said Charlie. "Liberty," Julius replied. Liberty. His parents' liberty seemed further off than ever. It was lucky he could not see at that moment, tied up in the back of the personnel department's van, racing south, bouncing down the motorway. The lion's liberty was a scary challenge to be achieved. Charlie felt hollow inside. For everyone else, all this was fuss and excitement. For him, it was more work and more worry and more fear. So Venice it was. They'd leave after the performance and head straight for the train. After lunch, Charlie was about to go and check out the lie of the land and work out their route to the station when Macomo called him back to the lion cabin. "Here, boy," he said, "put these on." He tossed Charlie a bundle of clothes, a red velvet suit with gold braid at the shoulders and down the front, and twisted gold down the side of the trousers, and a pair of black boots that were too big for him. Charlie stared, and then he put them on. Charlie had continued to give Macomo some of the lion's medicine each day, and the trainer had changed visibly. He was less controlled, less quietly intelligent. Before, he had looked as if nothing in the world would ever worry him. Now he was moody and inconsistent. It didn't make him less frightening. Macomo looked at him in the outfit. "Good enough," he said, and then, taking Charlie roughly by the head, swiftly wrapped something round him, twisting and tucking, and Charlie stood straight again. He found he was wearing a turban. "Good," he said. "In the parade you ride your friend." There was a silence for a moment. "I what?" said Charlie, bewildered. "You ride your friend," said Macomo simply. "What friend?" said Charlie, hoping very much that Macomo did not mean what he thought he meant. "Your friend, the younger lion," said Macomo. "Him." He gestured shortly. The young lion stared sleepily ahead, his nose on his paws. He seemed not to notice that it was being gestured at. "But I can't," stuttered Charlie. "I can't ride a—" When he'd said to Major Tibb that he could do a handstand on a lion's back, he'd been joking, of course. You can't do things like that. A lion's a wild animal, a creature of strength and dignity who could, and quite possibly would, rip you to shreds and eat you. Just because these lions were in a circus didn't wipe out their lion instincts. "I know," said Macomo, "what you can do." His face was still as a stone and his expression blank, but his eyes were twitching. Charlie's knees went a little weak. "I know exactly. I have heard you." What had he heard, and what had he understood? "So you say to your friend that you are riding him today," said Macomo, "and then you ride him in the parade and then for the show, and I will tell you later what you are to do." "But," said Charlie. He didn't know what to say. Macomo suddenly moved close to him. "Do you think," he said very quietly, "that you are the first ever to have spoken to them? Do you really think that some little London boy would be the only person ever in the history of the entire world with that gift? Why would it be you, little boy? Why? Why?" And Charlie knew, suddenly, that Macomo was jealous, and that when he said, "Why you?" he was really saying, "Why wasn't it me, Macomo, who was given this gift?" Macomo gave himself a little shake and was calm again. "You will be my translator, little boy, and I will make this the finest lion show the world has ever seen, and it starts tonight." He narrowed his eyes a little. "I did not believe for a while that you had this thing," he said, "or I would have started work sooner with you. But when I saw you this afternoon calling to that alley cat by the canal, well, Tomorrow we will come up with something fabulous for tomorrow, or after tomorrow. I have plans, little lion boy. We can. Oh, and after the show, you will put the lions to bed. I'm going out." His eyes were gleaming, and Charlie knew that at that moment, Macomo had received the message from Mabel. The message, not from Mabel. And he knew whether or not Mabel went to the Ches Billy after the show, Macomo would go, and that he going was all that Charlie needed. And with that knowledge, Charlie didn't care what Macomo thought. After all, after tonight, there wouldn't be here. "Okay," he said quietly, and pulled on his boots. "So tell him," said Macomo with a little smile. Charlie looked up at him nervously. "What? Any reason why not?" Charlie was silent. It felt very peculiar, after hiding the fact he could speak to cats for so long, to be suddenly ordered to talk in this way. He just couldn't admit his ability to Macomo. Everything in him shrieked no, but he had to do something. He swallowed and then went over to the young lion and spoke, very quietly so that Macomo would not hear him or see him, into the lion's ear. "Young lion," he said in English. The young lion did not respond. He didn't even flicker a whisker. "Young lion," Charlie said, "Monsieur Macomo believes I can talk to you, and I don't know what to do, how to show him it's a crazy idea. Anyway, he said to tell you that I've got to ride you in the parade this evening. Speak lion, boy," shouted Macomo. "Don't try to make a fool of me." He was rubbing his temple. Charlie hoped he still had a headache. Raw," said Charlie. "Meow, row. I can't, sir. I don't know what you want from me." He tried to look as if he was about to burst into tears. The young lion yawned and covered his nose with his paw. Macomo was watching them intently. "And?" he said. "And what?" said Charlie, trying not to let it sound rude. "And what did he say?" "Monsieur Macomo, sir," said Charlie desperately. "I don't know what... I can't talk to lions, sir. Why would I? How could I?" "You can," said Macomo shortly. He fingers his rhinoceros skin whip. "And you are going to teach me." At that moment, Charlie became heartily glad that he was leaving the circus and realised that he would have no regrets at all. Of course, the moment Macomo left the cabin, Charlie and the lions had a great deal to say to each other on the urgency of their having to leave, on going directly to the station to get the train to Venice, and on whether Sergi would reappear before they left, and on the precise plans. "The people will leave after the show from the gangplank amidships," said Charlie, "the one opposite the grand staircase. Everybody will be up there, or below, here, clearing up. Now, if we come out of this cabin and immediately cut round behind it, we can leave the ship by the stern." "How do you suggest we get ashore?" asked the oldest lion. Now that he was back on form, the young lion was far less chatty. The lionesses still just stared and lounged about. Charlie had no idea what was going on in their heads, but he was beginning to suspect that maybe a great deal was, and they just weren't letting on. "I've been thinking about that," he said respectfully, "and knowing your great physical skills and circus experience, I was wondering whether you'd be able to walk the rope that attaches the ship to the quayside. It's not very far. I checked, and the rope is tight." The yellow lioness flickered her whiskers. "You want us to walk the tightrope?" the oldest lion said, with a note of amusement in his voice. "Yes, sir," said Charlie, "if it's not too..." He meant to say something about if it's not too undignified, but it seemed disrespectful, undignified somehow, even to mention the lion's dignity. The oldest lion gave him what from everybody else would be a little giggle. "I imagine we can do it," he said. He looked around at the others. His mane was thicker, his eyes brighter, the black of his lips shinier. He was better. The lionesses yawned disdainfully, and the younger lions just raised their elegant lion eyebrows and twitched their whiskers back and forth again. Walking a little bit of a tightrope was not the slightest bit problem to them. "Excellent," said Charlie. "Then, once on the quayside, just follow me down the towpath to the river, across the bridge to the station, and we'll find the train. It'll be dark and late. There'll be no one on the towpath or by the riverbanks, and it's hardly lit anyway. The bridge'll be the risky bit, but again, it should be empty by then." His heart sank. Look at them. They were huge. How was he going to get 6 lions across a bridge in the centre of a city without being seen, even in the middle of the night? Crikey, he hoped everybody in Paris would be drunk or in bed or at the circus. Then, for the station, I've thought about that. If we come in on the tracks rather than the platforms, we shouldn't see anybody, but we'll still reach the train. If we lose each other, we can make our own way, and we've got an hour to get over there before it leaves at midnight. Most of the passengers will already be on board because it opens at 10, and they can go to bed early, and with that, he ground to a halt. Have you booked our seats? Isn't that what humans do? Said the oldest lion with a smile. No, sir, said Charlie, worried for a moment, before he realised the lion was teasing him. No, sir, he said again, smiling, but I have got a plan for when we'll travel. And Charlie and the lions talked softly late into the night, finalising their plans. The plan was full of pitfalls, and Charlie was scared.